The wind on Ridge 14 cut through even the thickest layers, carrying with it a kind of biting cold that didn't just touch skin, it sank into bones. The Montana-Canada border stretched beneath the outcrop like a frozen quilt, dotted with pine, rock, and long-forgotten trails, once used by game and now, more often, by ghosts of a different kind. Staff Sergeant Elena Marcus adjusted the strap of her rucksack and crouched low, scanning the jagged horizon. The others had packed up and left an hour ago, their headlights bobbing over the icy ridgeline until they vanished into the dark. She could still hear the hum of the last departing ATV in her memory, though now the only sounds were the whispering trees and the slow grind of frost shifting on stone. The patrol had lasted 3 days. Standard recon to verify intel about increased border crossings in this particular sector. They'd found nothing. No footprints, no drones. No signs of heat signatures beyond the occasional deer herd or roaming coyote. Protocol said to rotate out and call it a clean sweep. But Elena had stayed. She hadn't voiced it aloud, not even to Sergeant Wilcox, who had shot her a long look when she volunteered. "You sure? This ridge is hell on your joints after sundown. You're not a rookie anymore, Marquez." "I'll be fine," she had replied. "Something doesn't feel right." Wilcox didn't argue. He knew her record: 9 years, 4 overseas tours, and 2 commendations for solo recon under pressure. She wasn't reckless. She listened to her gut, and it usually served her well. So they left her there, alone on the final ridge, with just her thermal scope, her M110 rifle, an emergency comes kit, and a day pack of rations. She settled into the blind she had built the first day, a depression of packed snow and stone behind a natural wall of brush. From here, she had a 270-degree view of the lower ravine and the northern slope. Ideal for overwatch, miserable for comfort. Her breath misted as she looked through her scope, sweeping in slow, controlled arcs. Nothing. Still nothing. Elena had learned to be patient. Combat patrols in Kandahar taught her that. You could sit for 20 hours and see nothing, only for the moment of truth to come in 10 seconds of confusion and fire. That was how danger worked, quietly, until it wasn't. She leaned back and sipped tepid coffee from a thermal flask. The sky had turned from a deep navy to full black no. No moon tonight, just a sweep of stars so clear they looked like holes. Poked in the ceiling of the world, dot somewhere down in that valley, was the old smuggler's path. Locals knew it, but it hadn't been used in years, not officially. But Elena knew better. She'd seen increased chatter in briefings, picked up on the faint patterns that didn't make the official reports. A shredded bit of foreign candy. Rapper found 200 miles from its origin. A hunting camera tampered with. A dog alerting to something its handler couldn't see. None of it was enough to raise alarms. But to her, it was a pattern. A soft echo beneath the obvious. She clicked back into her thermal scope and paused. A rabbit darted across a clearing, its body a bright orange against the muted blues of the cold terrain. She let out a breath and shifted her scope further down the slope. Then she heard it. A sound so faint it might have been imagined, but it wasn't. A crunch, slow and deliberate, like boot on snow. Then silence. Then another, slightly off-beat, like someone trying not to make sound, but failing to account for the weight of the cold. Her body went still. Only her hands moved, adjusting the zoom on her scope. She scanned to the southwest quadrant, near the broken fence post that marked the old ranger trail. Nothing. She shifted right, past the ravine. Then she saw it. A flicker dot, not movement. Light, a glint, metallic, reflective. Just for a second before it vanished. Behind a log dot her pulse spiked, but her breathing stayed slow. She dialed the zoom tighter. The terrain was dense. Pines and brush, clumped thick in the lowland. She couldn't make out a figure, but something was there. And it wasn't wildlife. She pulled back, flipped open her field tablet, and tried to raise command on comms. Alpha 1 to base. Ridge. 14. Possible contact. Southwest sector. Confirming heat and movement. Over. Nothing. Alpha 1 to base. Come in. More static. She frowned, adjusted her antenna, and switched to backup frequency. Still nothing. Comms could fail this far out. Snowstorms interfered. Satellites blinked. It wasn't uncommon. But just like the candy wrapper and the camera tampering, it wasn't just one thing. It was the accumulation. She turned back to her scope. The trees were still, but now her heart was thudding. Someone was down there, and she was alone. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The wind howled over the ridge as she lay back in position. Scope up, breath calm, and finger just beside the trigger guard. They thought this ridge was empty. They were wrong. Elena kept perfectly still. Every sound, every shift of wind through pine needles, pressed louder in her ears now. The flicker of metal she'd seen below might have been anything. A dropped beer can, a deer with a tracking collar. But it wasn't. Her gut told her so, and after years in combat zones and border outposts, her gut was more reliable than any sensor. She panned her thermal scope across the trees again. A flickering mass of orange, almost indistinct, flashed once at the edge of a drainage cut, too low for a standing man. Maybe prone, maybe crawling. Her back stiffened against the frozen ground. She squinted, adjusting the contrast on the thermal overlay, isolating heat signatures from residual warm spots in the soil. For a split second, it sharpened. An arm. No doubt now. Human. Someone was there, creeping through brush on all fours, avoiding the trails, the obvious paths. She rolled onto her side, retrieved her notebook, and sketched a quick layout of the zone. She marked the point of movement, roughly 180 meters southwest, near the broken drainage pipe. That location hadn't appeared on her unit's latest terrain scan, but to a trained intruder, it was an entry point. One missed by software, overlooked by most human eyes. Not hers. She glanced up. Still nothing audible beyond the hiss of wind. She leaned in again, breathing shallowly through her nose, body steady. A flicker further right now. A second figure. Same low movement. Same deliberate crawl. Her body stiffened. This wasn't random. This wasn't a lost hiker. And it wasn't one guy testing luck. It was a team. 3 years ago, along the Texas border, Elena had seen something similar. A two-man breach followed by a decoy vehicle and a third man with SATCOM gear. That op had nearly slipped past patrol, masked as illegal migration. Except it wasn't. The man they caught had military ID from a non-allied state and detailed notes on troop rotation schedules. This had the same scent. Elena scanned again. Now there were 3. The third moved more confidently. He took point, signaling the other 2 with hand gestures, fast and precise. Not gang signs, not random waves. Tactical signals. The kind used by trained infantry units to move silently through contested terrain. She lowered her scope. Her heart beat faster, but her hands were calm. Cold, yes, but steady. She took a breath, reached for her backup radio, and tried again. Alpha 1. To base. Confirm multiple unauthorized personnel on approach. Sector 4B, Ridge 14 Quadrant. 3 bodies, armed, tactical movement. Request QRF, immediate. Over. Only static. She checked the antenna, switched to the third frequency, the most secure one. Again, silence. That sealed it. This wasn't a malfunction. It was interference. Someone was jamming the comms. Either that, or they were too far beyond the last repeater tower's range. But given the timing, she doubted coincidence. If the team was military trained, they knew what to target. A scout without communications was isolated, vulnerable, an easy outlier to pick off before pushing further into U.S. territory. Elena didn't panic. She wasn't new to this game. She checked her rifle, M110 semi-automatic sniper system, and confirmed a fresh mag, chambered, safety on. She adjusted the suppressor and set her rangefinder to 200 meters. Wind, 8 knots from the northwest. Temp, -3 Celsius. No snow expected, but the air was dense and dry, ideal for long shots. She stayed prone and watched the third man move toward the drainage pipe. He paused, crouched, and looked back at the others. She couldn't hear them, but it was clear they were communicating. And fast, like they had done this before. No lights, no lasers, no identifiers, not cartel, not hikers, not local, possibly a recon. Unit from outside U.S. borders, something clandestine. The kind of threat most people didn't believe reached this far inland, but it had. Right to her ridge. She moved back 6 feet from her nest and activated her emergency beacon. It was old-school tech, a shortwave pulse beacon with a signal meant to trigger automated radar pings from a local relay drone. Still, she didn't know if it got through. Then, a sound. Low, metallic, almost a clink. She leaned into her scope. The lead man was unhooking something from his pack. A small box, no larger than a loaf of bread, covered in dull black casing. Wires wrapped tight. Around its side. She zoomed in. It had a satellite dish, retractable. They were setting up comms of their own. That meant coordination. That meant this wasn't just a test run. That meant they were waiting for a signal, and she was running out of time. Elena pulled back and settled in again. Her hand hovered over the rifle's trigger. One wrong decision could escalate something far beyond her control. But one moment too late, and they'd vanish. She took a deep breath, slowed her heart rate, and watched. The second. Figure started to flank the ridge, moving up, almost toward her position. Not directly, not yet. But that path would intersect hers within 10 minutes. If they were sweeping for scouts, they'd find her. Unless she found them first. And in that moment, staring through a frozen lens at 3 ghosts in the trees, Elena understood the truth. She wasn't just watching. She was the line, and it was already being tested. From her position, Elena could see the enemy without being seen. That was always the edge. Remain invisible, and you control the outcome. But that edge was narrowing now. The third intruder had started to loop. His crawl had become a low crouch. His silhouette dipped in and out of her thermal scope like a wraith, moving laterally along the slope. If he kept his trajectory, he would pass within 80 meters of her position close, enough to hear her if she breathed wrong, stepped wrong, even exhaled too sharply in the still air. Elena repositioned, inch by inch. Her body hugged the snow, breath measured. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, but her nerves held steady. She'd trained for this in deserts, in mountains, and in kill houses lit only by the strobe of gunfire. She hadn't been afraid then, and she wasn't afraid now. But she was calculating. Always calculating. She tapped into her sniper training. In this cold, movement was currency, and she wasn't about to spend more than necessary. She let the rifle settle back onto her shoulder, scope realigned, crosshairs floating just a few meters ahead of the scout's projected path. She could take the shot, one suppressed round, and it would be over at least for him. But shooting would expose her position to the other 2. Worse, if they were relaying back to another unit, it would alert them that the ridge wasn't empty. Elena needed more intel. She adjusted her thermal overlay again. It was picking up their body heat just enough now to reveal clearer patterns. The three men were spread in a triangle formation, classic fire and move layout. Military precision. Not drug mules, not hikers. This was organized recon, and it wasn't. Amateur. The lead man had resumed assembling the comms device. He anchored it to a snow-covered log and knelt beside it, fiddling with dials. She zoomed in. There etched on the case, a mark she recognized from a field op 3 years ago. A red trident surrounded by foreign characters. She didn't need translation. That symbol belonged to a foreign intelligence branch, flagged during multiple NATO briefings. Elena's heart sank. This wasn't a smuggling run. It was a dry run for infiltration. They were mapping responses, signal weaknesses, terrain, access. And tonight, the United States had no eyes on this ridge except hers. Elena reached for her radio again, toggled to the emergency burst mode, and activated the encrypted ping. One short blast of data. Not voice, no signals to intercept. Just her coordinates, tagged with contact imminent. She didn't know if it went through, but it was the best she could do without blowing her cover. Then came a rustle closer than before. She swiveled back, just in time to catch the flanker, the third man, pausing no more than 40 meters below her. He raised a small object to his eye monocular, probably infrared. He was scanning the ridge, her ridge. He hadn't spotted her yet, but he was getting close. Elena slowly rotated her rifle. Her crosshairs found his chest. She took a long breath in. Not yet. Wait. She studied him. His gear was matte black, no national insignia. Pouches tight, vest fitted for movement. Professional. He knew how to move in wilderness, but this terrain wasn't his home. His pacing was too cautious. He was expecting wildlife, not resistance. Elena reached down, tapped her wristpad, and switched on her heartbeat regulator, a biofeedback system that steadied her vitals. She narrowed her aim. The man moved again, dash upward. 10 more meters, and he'd stumble right over her. She had to make a decision. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "You come this far. You don't walk back down." Her finger tensed. Then he turned, just slightly. Not enough to leave, but enough to scan another angle. He lifted the monocular again and swept east. She waited. Let him drift out of her immediate radius. He hadn't seen her. Not yet. Then something else caught her attention. The comms device below had powered on. A faint, blinking green light. That meant they had signal somehow. Either a satellite bounce or an illegal relay drone overhead. And if it was bouncing back data, Elena's mind raced. They weren't just testing terrain. They were uploading surveillance, coordinates, timing, coverage, maps. She couldn't let that data leave the valley. Her eyes jumped back to the second man, the one kneeling at the device. She dialed her scope to max precision, adjusted for drift. It was 220 meters. Wind had picked up slightly. She recalculated. This was a .1 clean shot. Suppressed, silenced. If she was lucky, the others would think it was a snapped branch, or nothing at all. She exhaled. Squeezed. The man jerked once, then crumpled sideways. No cry. No alarm. He was down. Elena didn't pause. She rolled left, rifle tucked close, crawled 5 meters to a fallback spot behind a small outcrop. She was exposed here if they got above her, but she needed new cover. Through the brush, she spotted movement. The flanker froze. He'd heard something. Then she saw it, the red laser of a rangefinder sweep over the snow, just meters from where she had been. He was marking distance, targeting, but he hadn't fired, which meant he wasn't sure where she was. Good. Elena moved again, slow and deliberate. She wasn't just surviving now. She was hunting. And the ghosts in the trees? They were about to find out the ridge wasn't empty. The ridge had gone silent again, deafeningly so. Elena knew this kind of silence. It wasn't peace. It was the space between moves, the waiting breath before the knife fell. Below her, one of the three was now still and lifeless near the combs. Box. That left two, and they knew something was wrong. The flanker who had almost found her position had dropped low, behind a felled pine, eyes sweeping, movements tight. The third man, the leader, had disappeared from her line of sight. That was what concerned her most. The experienced ones didn't panic. They vanished, assessed, and countered Dot. She had seconds to reposition before they flanked Dot, rolling to her side. Elena scanned the horizon. The flanker's position was predictable. He'd stay on overwatch while the third man maneuvered. She knew that move. She had used it herself dozens of times in Afghanistan and Iraq. Keep the shooter focused while the partner circled and closed. The noose Dot, she had to break the pattern. Her hands worked fast. She pulled a small infrared decoy from her pack, just a puck-shaped heat emitter about the size of a hockey puck. She clicked it on and tossed it 10 feet to her right, into a low patch of scrub. In a thermal lens, it would look like a warm body, not moving but crouched, maybe waiting. Then she backed away, low and silent, circling left around a gnarled tree stump. Her eyes never left the path ahead, scanning for movement. Her boots pressed into the snow without sound, heel to toe, weight. Carefully balanced, Dot, every inch of her training came alive now. She was no longer on defense. She was stalking. A crow barked somewhere in the distance, disturbed by something. Maybe the intruder, maybe her. Either way, the sound shattered the quiet like a rifle blast. Dot, Elena dropped and listened. Crunch, a footfall. And another, closer. Behind her, she swung around, rifle up. Dot, nothing. Dot, just trees. Just dark. Just silence. But she felt it, that itch between her shoulder blades. The same feeling she'd had walking through alleys in Fallujah, where every door might hide a rifle barrel. The leader was near. She dropped into prone and crawled, 20 feet through shallow snow, pushing through thorns and pine needles, ignoring the cold biting her face. Her scope swept the terrain again. Dot, then dash movement. Out a figure darted between trees, fast. Too fast to aim. But he'd made a mistake. He'd crossed into light snow. Left footprints. Elena marked the direction, adjusted her angle, and began to loop. Around, cutting a diagonal pattern that would intercept him in about 30 meters if he kept his course. She set her breathing low, slow. Dot, each crunch of his boots in snow sounded closer now. Then she saw him, just ahead, kneeling by a rock, scanning through binoculars. She dropped to a knee, leveled her scope, and aligned the shot, but something stopped her finger. His hands. He wasn't holding a rifle. Not yet. He had binoculars. Combs gear strapped across his chest, but his sidearm was holstered, which meant he was the intel, not the trigger. Elena weighed the moment. Kill him now, or wait? Then he tapped his earpiece, still unaware of her. Dot, that decided it. She squeezed. Dot up. Dot. He toppled over, crumpling into the snow. No scream, no drama. Just a breath expelled from lungs that would never fill again. 2 down, 1 left. She backtracked. Immediately, anticipating the final operative's reaction. He would have heard something. A suppressed rifle wasn't silent, just quieter. And a man falling into snow still made noise. The heat decoy was still active where she left it, glowing faintly in thermal. She took cover in a stand of spruce trees just uphill and trained her scope on the decoy. And sure enough, the last man came for it. He moved cautiously, weapon raised. He swept it in a tight arc, paused, crouched, and stared. For nearly a full minute he didn't move, just watched the fake heat signature. Elena waited. This was the moment. This was when he'd either move in or retreat. He moved, 1 slow step, then another. He raised his rifle, finger hovering near the trigger. That was all she needed. She fired. The man dropped instantly, his rifle spinning out of his hands as he hit the ground hard. Then there was only the wind again. Elena exhaled and lowered her weapon. 3 bodies in the snow. No alarms, no warning shots, no radio chatter. She rose slowly, keeping low, and made her way to the first man she shot, the one at the comms box. Up close, the reality of what she had seen through the scope became chilling. His vest held encrypted comms, advanced optics, and a small drive locked in a metal shell. She knelt and retrieved the device, checking for transmit signals. None, but it had been active, recording likely, logging terrain, GPS markers, radio patterns. And now it was hers. She looked up at the stars, cold and clear above her, and whispered, "Not tonight." A red light blinked faintly on her wrist pad. Signal restored. Her emergency burst had worked. A response ping followed, encrypted and delayed, but clear. Ridge 14 confirmed. Response ETA 21 minutes. Hold position. She smiled grimly. They were late. She wasn't. She was still the last on the ridge. And because of that, the line had held. Elena sat in the snow beside the third body, the final intruder, as the sky began to shift from ink black to the dim blue of early dawn. The ridge no longer felt alive with threat. Instead, it was heavy with aftermath, with questions, answers, and the silence left behind when something dangerous had been stopped just in time. She didn't relax. Not yet. Her rifle lay across her lap, still loaded, still hot from the last shot. The cold wind gnawed at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the small metallic drive she'd recovered from the enemy's comms pack. It had no screen, no ports, no buttons. Just a faint, pulsing red light and a foreign emblem etched on one side, the same trident she'd seen through her scope. Elena had once attended a classified seminar in D.C. in a sterile, windowless room. A man from the DIA had shown similar equipment recovered from a downed operative in Poland, a probe used to map NATO blind spots. The trident insignia was always there. This wasn't a local op. This wasn't even national. It was international. Incursion, and they hadn't just wandered into U.S. territory. They knew what they were doing, where they were, and if Elena hadn't been on that ridge, they would have vanished undetected, leaving behind only digital ghosts in compromised terrain. She heard the faint, rhythmic whoop-whoop of blades before she saw the helicopter. Distant, coming fast from the southeast. She stood and triggered her IR beacon, signaling her location for the inbound QRF Quick Reaction Force. As the aircraft banked into view, kicking up snow and sending pine needles swirling, Elena backed off from the bodies. Her rifle was slung, hands raised slightly to show no threat. The black and gray chopper touched down hard. 2 operators jumped out, black gear, U.S. flags stitched onto their sleeves, rifles up. Not local sheriff's deputies, not border patrol. These were military. One pointed to the bodies. The other came straight for Elena. "Sergeant Ramirez?" The man asked, voice muffled behind a helmet mask. "That's me," she said, without blinking. "You alone out here?" She nodded. "Was supposed to be 3 of us. 2 got recalled for a malfunction. I stayed behind." The man looked toward the bodies. "Lucky you did?" Elena didn't laugh. He waved, and 2 more agents, who immediately began bagging the evidence. Weapons, comms gear, clothing. One scanned the bodies with a handheld biometric tool. Elena watched as the device blinked yellow, then green, confirming something. "Not locals," the agent confirmed. "No IDs, no match in federal databases. Prints might trace elsewhere, but this isn't their first crossing." "I know," she replied. "They weren't testing fences." They were mapping weaknesses. The man turned toward her. You shoot all three? Suppressed. 1 shot each. He looked impressed, but didn't say it. Professionals didn't hand out praise easily, not in moments like this. Instead, he handed her a thermal blanket and a metal cup of black coffee from a thermos strapped to his side. Sit tight. Debrief team inbound. This one's going to the top. Elena took the coffee, but didn't sit. Her eyes drifted toward the tree line again, where she'd first seen the shimmer of metal hours ago. Her scope had caught what the patrol overlooked. But what haunted her more was why it had been overlooked. This wasn't random. These operatives had jammed communications, bypassed detection grids, exploited terrain gaps only a local would miss or someone with advanced intelligence had shared. That meant the possibility of internal compromise. Her pulse quickened at the thought. The lead operative had worn a patch beneath his vest. She hadn't noticed it through the scope, but when she searched his body, she'd found it partially sewn into the liner. A patch from a foreign unit she knew had no business being in North America, especially not near a U.S. tactical corridor. She approached the QRF commander again. I want to stay on this, she said. I need to know where that data drive ends up. You'll be in the report loop, he replied, avoiding her gaze. But this is above all of us now. Langley, Fort Meade, this'll go dark fast. That didn't sit right with Elena. She'd spent her entire adult life in the service of a country that often buried truth for the sake of calm. But she had seen too much tonight to pretend this could be swept away. She handed him the patch. This shouldn't have been here, she said. And it won't be the last time. The agent studied it, jaw tightening. He didn't argue. Another helicopter approached in the distance, bigger, heavier, likely the intelligence collection unit. Elena turned back toward her ridge, the place she'd spent long nights in frost and silence. Listening, watching, waiting. It no longer felt remote. It felt like the edge of something much larger. And now she wasn't just guarding forest trails or illegal crossings. She'd stumbled into a covert war that didn't officially exist. And somehow, she knew they'd be back. Not tonight. Not soon. Because when they came looking again, they'd bring more than 3. They'd bring silence, misdirection, and deeper shadows, and they'd expect no one to see them. But Elena would be watching, still the last on the ridge, still holding the line. Elena hadn't slept. It had been 43 hours since the first shot echoed on that ridge, and still, her adrenaline refused to fade. She sat in a nondescript concrete room 2 floors below a government building in Denver. One fluorescent light buzzed overhead. No clock, no phones, no insignias on the men who escorted her. There got just the sound of the past, playing over in her head, the thump of the suppressed shots, the last breath of the infiltrators, and the blinking red light on that data drive. The room's door opened. With a mechanical click, a man in a suit entered, gray, unwrinkled, expensive, but he looked more like a soldier than a politician. His hair was cut military short, his build square and tight, his gaze sharp and calculating. He sat across from her and placed a file on the table. Thick, labeled, Operation Tetherline, classified, eyes only. You did good work, Sergeant Ramirez, he said without offering his name. I wasn't aware it was an operation, she replied. It wasn't, not officially. But you stepped into the middle of one. You weren't supposed to. Elena narrowed her eyes. Was I in the wrong place, or were they? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the file and slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy satellite shot her ridge, the bodies and the comms equipment. 3 men, he said, infiltrated from across the border, not carrying narcotics, not trafficking people. Their mission was data topographic, digital blind spots, and federal response timing. Elena leaned forward. I clocked them before they could upload. They were transmitting. He nodded. We recovered fragments from the drive. Encrypted relay packets to a node we believe is somewhere near Juarez. The source language is Cyrillic. Russian? She asked. He raised a brow. Not official Russian military. Not even mercs. They're using cutouts, private intermediaries. Groups that don't exist on paper, but operate with precision. They're probing, and you're the only one who saw them. Elena processed that in silence. Why wasn't that ridge covered by drone? She asked. Why was I the only one left? Out there? The man sighed through his nose. We've had internal interference. Someone turned off an automated perimeter alert 15 minutes before those three crossed the threshold. Someone who had high-level access. Her blood ran cold. We've been compromised? We suspect it's bigger than that, he said. They're testing our reflexes, seeing what happens if they breach undetected. Your presence on that ridge changed the experiment. They thought the lab was empty, she said. Exactly. He slid another document forward. This one was marked Top-Line Assessment, Shadowlands. They'll be back, he continued. And next time, they'll bring more. Not just scouts, saboteurs, diversions, cyber disruption, maybe even paramilitary. But your actions last night sent them a message. He paused, but messages work both ways. Elena stared at the file. You're saying they know I was there? We think so. The first man you shot, he had a transmitter sewn into his jacket. Lining. It activated post-mortem. Not a distress call, a signal flare, letting their people know the op was compromised. The man nodded grimly. That patch you found on the second man? Our analysts believe it was intentionally planted. A misdirection. They want us to think it's one group, so we ignore the real architects. And who are the real architects? He leaned back. We're not sure yet. But the footprints lead in one direction toward domestic support. Someone on our side turned off that alert. Elena clenched her jaw. You think it's inside the agency? I think it's bigger than one agency. He stood, smoothed his coat. You'll be reassigned, Sergeant. Temporarily. You'll consult under a new name in a new unit. Your story doesn't leave this room. She rose to meet his gaze. I'm not going into hiding. You're not, he replied. You're going deeper. He handed her a badge blank white with a chip embedded in the back. No name, just clearance. From now on, you're shadow side. You operate where the lights are dim and the rules shift. You'll be contacted by a handler named Jameson in 72 hours. Until then, you disappear. Elena pocketed the badge. I didn't volunteer for this, she said quietly. No one does, he replied. But some people don't get to walk away from the ridge. He turned and left out the door locked behind him. Elena sat again, the silence thick. She looked down at the file, still on the table, fingers brushing its cold edge. Operation Tetherline.Shadowlens.Terms. That sounded like whispers in a hurricane. Nothing about this was standard. Nothing about this felt safe. But then again, safety was never her job. Her job had always been vigilance. And now, it extended beyond sniper nests and quiet forests. It stretched into places where wars didn't make headlines, and enemies didn't wear uniforms. The silence between the signals, that was where she would operate now. And in that silence, she would wait and watch, because the next breach wouldn't happen under a moonlit ridge. It would happen where no one was looking, except her. 3 days later, Elena stood in the heart of a crowd in Washington, D.C., feeling more alone than she ever had on that frozen ridge. Disguised in streetwear hood up, dark glasses, no gear, no visible combs, she blended in with tourists and commuters outside Union Station. The scent of coffee and exhaust hung thick in the summer air. But Elena's senses were tuned to something else. Angles of approach, Exit routes, reflective surfaces. She was being followed. She didn't know how long. It started as a shadow in the corner of a mirrored pillar 2 blocks back. Then again someone pausing at the same vendor stall she passed, flipping through postcards too casually. No obvious aggression, no visible weapons. But the feeling was there. Something had found her. She tightened her grip on the disposable phone she'd been issued burner tech. One use code to trigger extraction. But she hesitated. Jameson was supposed to meet her here. If she flinched now, she'd lose that contact. And she needed answers more than she needed safety. Then, just past the food court, she spotted him. Tall, clean-shaven, buzzed hair and a faux pressed gray jacket. He looked more like a business consultant than a covert intelligence liaison. But the way his eyes scanned the crowd told her everything. He spotted her at the same moment. "Elena," he said as he approached, voice low, not quite a greeting. "Jameson," she replied, stepping in sync beside him as he walked past without breaking pace. "First lesson," he muttered. "Every city has eyes, but the ones you worry about aren't on rooftops. They're in the plumbing." Elena gave him a side glance. "That's cryptic, even for a spook. It'll make sense soon." They moved swiftly down a side alley behind the train station, then entered an underground stairwell that led strangely to a dry cleaner's. The clerk at the front didn't look up as they passed into the back. Behind a rolling garment rack, Jameson pressed his palm to a biometric scanner. The wall slid open with a mechanical click. "Welcome to the floor beneath the floor," he said. Inside, the temperature dropped. The room was sleek, windowless, with digital panels on all 4 walls and a circular table at the center. A row of screens blinked with satellite feeds, data points, and names without photos. Jameson sat and gestured for her to do the same. "The team that crossed into your ridge wasn't rogue," he said, without delay. They were part of a larger initiative where tracking Shadowlands wasn't just a coding name. It's a system. A system for what? "Exploiting blind spots," he said, eyes steady. "Not just geographic. Bureaucratic, technological, informational. Whoever is pulling strings knows how our agencies don't talk to each other. They slip between those cracks." He pulled up a satellite image of a remote facility near the Arizona-Mexico border, then another near the Bering Strait, both marked in red. Each of these was tested. And each time, someone on the inside delayed response by exactly 6 minutes. Elena frowned. "They're tracking latency." "Exactly. They're not just probing, they're measuring how long it takes us to notice." She leaned in. "Why?" "Because timing is everything," Jameson replied. "And if you want to stage an event that destabilizes a region, turns allies into adversaries, you don't send a bomb. You send data." He tapped the drive recovered from the ridge. That little thing nearly triggered a cascade alert. If they'd gotten it into the right relay, it would have spoofed a radar anomaly over New Mexico. Made it look like an unauthorized launch. You don't need missiles to start a war anymore. You need believable blips. Elena felt the weight of what she had stopped. But it didn't comfort her. "You said someone delayed response on the ridge," she said. "Any progress on who?" Jameson hesitated, then tapped on a panel and pulled up a name. Elena's breath caught. "LT. Call Sarah Grant," her former commanding officer. One of the few she actually trusted during her tours. A woman who stood by her when Elena was nearly discharged for speaking out about chain of command negligence. "No," she said, almost to herself. "Sarah's clean. Always has been." Jameson nodded slowly. "We thought so too. But we traced 3 blocked signals in the last month to her terminal. Maybe she's compromised. Maybe someone used her credentials. Either way, she's part of this. Where is she now?" "Off-grid. Supposedly at a rural rehab center for stress treatment. But the coordinates lead to a black site. unacknowledged. Elena stood. And I need to go there. That's not your directive, he warned. I don't care. If she's guilty, I'll bring her in. If she's not, she's a loose end. They'll cut. Jameson gave her a long look, then slid over a black keycard. No official transport. No agency comes. You're on your own if this goes south. Elena nodded, pocketing the keycard. I'm used to ridges, she said. And I work better alone. As she stepped into the corridor, her senses sharpened again. The same hum. The same subtle quiet. But this time, it wasn't just about preventing a breach. This time, someone wanted her removed. And she had one name, one lead, and one burning question. Who turned the lights off on the ridge, and why? The facility wasn't marked on any map. No road signs, no barbed wire. Just an old forestry road in Idaho that dead-ended at a rusted cattle gate. Beyond that, a hollowed-out lodge that hadn't seen guests since the Cold War. Satellite imagery showed a crumbling roof and overgrown trails. But infrared told a different story. Heat signatures, electrical flow, movement beneath the foundation. Elena stood in the timberline, wind tugging at her jacket, watching the compound through binoculars. She saw no guards, no patrols. But she knew better than to believe in silence anymore. This place wasn't dead. It was hiding, and someone inside. It had once taught her to fire with breathless precision and see the target no one else saw. LT. Call. Sarah Grant. Elena moved fast through the trees, keeping low. She didn't use the path's invited cameras. She stayed in the brush, approaching from the western slope. At the rear of the lodge, an old maintenance door hung loose on one hinge. The screws had rusted, but the lock was new. One hard kick. The door cracked open. Inside, the smell hit her first. Disinfectant, ozone, the faint trace of sterilized electronics. This wasn't a rehab center. This was a holding pen for people, data, or secrets. Probably all three. She stepped inside, pistol drawn. Her boots made no sound on the concrete. Down a corridor, lights flickered overhead, faint green glows guiding the path. She passed doors with no handles, all locked tight. Behind one, she thought. She heard breathing. Behind another, a slow, steady beep like a heart monitor with no audience. And then she found the room, door ajar, soft lamp on, and Sarah Grant sitting calmly at a desk, typing. She didn't even turn when Elena entered. I wondered when you'd show up, Sarah said quietly. Elena didn't lower the pistol. You were supposed to be out, gone. You faked the medical. Leave. I had to, Sarah said, fingers freezing over the keyboard. They were watching everything. You saw that on the ridge. You turned off the alert system. You let them in. Sarah looked up at her now tired, aged in a way Elena hadn't expected. I didn't let them in. I let you see them. That threw Elena off balance. Sarah stood, hands up. They already had access, Elena, through channels so deep, even Dia didn't see them. I tried reporting it. I filed encrypted warnings. Each one disappeared. So I found a way to make it visible. I used the ridge. You made me bait? I made you a witness, Sarah said, eyes flashing. If anyone else saw them, it would be classified into nothingness. But you? You acted. You made it messy. You forced response. That bought me time. Elena processed that, her mind racing. So the breach, the three operatives, were real, deadly, but monitored. I knew their approach vector, their timing. You had the scope. I made sure you were the one left behind. The weight of it dropped on Elena like snow from a pine bough. You risked everything on the hope I'd see them? I didn't hope, Sarah said. I knew. Elena lowered the pistol slightly. Why? Sarah walked to a wall panel, and peeled back a magnetic cover. Behind it drives. Dozens, each labeled with names, timestamps, locations. This is the real war, she said. What happened on that ridge is one slice. They've tested 30 sites like it. Not just borders communication hubs, fuel depots, GPS repeaters. Most times they were missed or ignored. And you've been tracking all of it. I was part of the team that created the initial response system, Sarah said. I built the protocols they're now circumventing. That's why they tried to burn me. Elena glanced at the drives. Why tell me now? Because Jameson isn't who he says he is. Elena froze. Sarah nodded toward a screen behind her security footage from Union Station. There was Jameson. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, a man Elena hadn't noticed, blurred by distance, but familiar. The man from the food stall. The one pretending to browse postcards. They're watching him too. He's a handler, but not just for you. He's feeding data both ways. Elena took a slow breath. So who do I trust? Sarah met her eyes. No. One. Not entirely. Not even me. Elena stared at her former commander, the woman who shaped her aim, her instincts, her ability to shoot once and only once. She holstered her pistol. What now? Sarah offered a drive. You take this to the press. Not through channels. Not to secure lines. You find someone who still believes in truth. You make this too big to bury. Elena hesitated. That'll paint a target on my back. Sarah smiled, faint but fierce. That's where you've always lived, Elena. You don't hide from targets. You see them before they see you. Elena took the drive. As she turned to leave, Sarah spoke again softly, but with weight. You didn't fire the last shot on that ridge. Elena paused. What do you mean? You never had to. You saw enough. You changed everything with your eyes, not your rifle. Elena walked out into the fading light, the drive burning in her pocket. This time, the ridge was the world. And her scope was wide open.